Hey, you guys, welcome back to another episode of Becoming Secure. This is your host, Emily, dating and relationship coach specializing in all things attachment. And I have a really super special guest with me on today's episode. And we're going to hear a bit about her story, a bit about her new man, just a bit about her transformation. And she actually just graduated from the Art of Secure Dating not too long ago. And that is my client, Chelsea. Hey, Chelsea.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of
It's
course.
lovely to
Thanks for
be
being
here.
with me. Yeah, it's lovely to have you. And will you tell us a little bit about you, Chelsea?
Sure. So my name is Chelsea. I am 32 and I originally come from South Africa, but I'm living in London, UK at the moment. Um, and I work in the NHS and the National Healthcare System with children. And I'm doing dietetics and love sport. That's why there's a a bike in the background, very active. But
Yep.
yeah, that's
Love
me in a
it.
nutshell.
Love it. Yeah, for anyone who's just listening to the podcast, we could see just the bike seat on the video. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, Chelsea, let's dive right in. And I want to hear a bit about, share with our listeners. What was dating like for you before the art of secure dating? Like, what were you experiencing? What kind of guys were you meeting? What were some of the main challenges that were coming up for you?
Yeah, I think anybody who kind of lives in a really busy city, I think can relate to just how difficult it can be to differentiate between good men and men that are going to waste your time. Um, and I think, yeah, I'd been single for some time, so about 4 years. Um, and in that time, I'd kind of come across men who seemed really eager, had all the kind of conventional right things in place, but it just never really materialized. So it didn't really go anywhere. There was always quite large intensity in the beginning, but it will kind of frizz out quite quickly. So um, yeah, after just repeated patterns of kind of being hopeful that maybe this is the one, or maybe this is the kind of guy I could be interested in. So trying to navigate those spaces. Um, that's kind of and also like online, like trying to follow all these people on Instagram who have advice on, dating and how to date well and the kind of people that you're looking for. It all just became really confusing, to be honest. So, and the results didn't change. So just ended up kind of meeting men that maybe, I go to church, so I'm a Christian background and on paper looked really attractive and ticked all the boxes, but then just never really materialized into a proper relationship that was committed and I wanted marriage and all those wonderful things, kids, family, but it just never really got there. So yeah.
Yeah. And so would you say some of those guys were like, did it seem like they were emotionally unavailable? Like, and were they kind of leading you on and making you think that things were going to go somewhere? Like, what were some of maybe the like mixed signals that you saw?
Yeah, so I think quite common ones are things like love bombing, so being like really intense and then pulling away kind of after about 2 or 3 months where it would kind of normally you would expect things to move forward. Um or then on the other extreme, not really showing a huge amount of interest, but I felt like I was chasing and trying to prove my worth and trying to to win them over and prove to them that I am worthy of love in some way. Um, yeah, and it was interesting because within myself, I shifted a lot between like feeling really anxious, or then completely overwhelmed. So like people that did show a lot of interest, I felt quite overwhelmed, and then people that didn't show much at all, I was like anxious to get their affection, and that made me feel a bit more in control, I think. Um, so yeah, so the kind of the men would the spectrum. I'd see all sorts, Um, yeah. And I think that that also made it confusing, was knowing, is it me? Is it them? What's the deal? What am I doing wrong? There has to be a formula that I need to crack. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can be really confusing when like there are so many kinds of people when you don't really understand like your own attachment and they're like, oh, this is maybe a trigger coming up for me, or whether that's on the anxious side or on the avoidance side. You know, one thing that Chelsea kind of discovered and that we discussed throughout the art of secure dating was like recognizing that you have a fearful avoidant attachment style and like what that actually looks like and how that's been playing out in dating. So I'm
Mm.
sure that will come up a little bit, but yeah, it can be so confusing when there's so many variables. And there's a lot of advice online that can be so black and white. And sometimes it's like telling you to play games or just like not the most helpful or not the most applicable. I'm curious if there was anything that, or like what was some of the advice that you were hearing that you maybe tried or that maybe confused you?
Yeah, I think like I do feel like as you say, the advice is quite extreme. So like if there's a complete lack or like sometimes you can interpret someone else's behavior as a lack of interest, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And I think that's something we we spoke a lot about in the Art of Secure Dating, which is really helpful, was figuring out what is a red flag, what is a green flag, what is an amber flag, and where do you give chances, where don't you? Um, and I think the advice is very much like if someone's not stepping up immediately, then cut them loose. So yeah, it just does kind of lead to a lot of serial dating in the sense of you're looking for this perfect person that has to show up on the first date or the second date. And people just don't work that way. Like, some do, and but then also you got to ask why. Like, are they just really good at dating? Or is someone a bit shy and just needs more time? So, um, I think I found, and for me being anxious, avoidant, oscillating between the two, to like cut things off felt safer for me. So no one would ever get close enough for it to actually form a good connection because it just was a lot safer to be like, well, this is a red flag, immediately gone, done, next, Um, which is interesting because I think we also spoke about, and it came up that I realized I was the red flag in a lot of situations, my behavior wasn't exactly healthy either. Um, which could have been triggering for other people. And yeah, so it's kind of I think online advice can be useful as a tool, but I think I was almost using it a little bit as my gospel Bible, like living by some of the advice because people looked like they had it all together. But these poor guys, I do feel a bit sorry for some of them. Yeah.
Ah, wow, there's so much good stuff in what you said, Chelsea. And I think a big part of this is just like there's a lot of great stuff online, but like recognizing that that is not going to replace like whether it's getting in a program or working with someone directly who can help you look at your situation specifically and help
Mm,
you see like, oh, okay, maybe that actually was the guy putting in a lot of effort and he's just pacing things more slowly, or no, maybe that actually is like a lack of interest on his part and he's playing games. And if you have had a lot of experiences with people who are not the healthiest and you don't really know what a healthy guy actually looks like, and you have your own attachment wounds, it can be so confusing to navigate those things. So just listening to kind of like blanket advice online isn't always the best thing. You know, some of it can be great, some of it can be helpful, but you have to figure out what actually applies to you directly. And I love what you said too about like recognizing that you were the red flag in certain situations. And I think that's so, so important. Like, if we want things to change, we have to also take accountability for our own end, right? So I love
yeah.
that you just have such a good mindset about these things. And like I think that's why you've been able to shift so many things so quickly, really just that accountability. So I love that. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to share to like shed light about your experience kind of before the program? Otherwise, we're gonna continue
Yeah,
on.
I
Yeah.
think did want to say because I'd been to a lot of counseling, specifically like you know lots of different types of counseling, and like obviously counseling is so valuable and so helpful. But I felt like I'd never done anything that had specifically dealt with, this element where I knew I wanted a relationship, but I kind of assumed that the counseling would affect my behavior in a way that was like would lead to relationship, if that makes sense. But what I found really useful is that the counseling was really great at almost creating self-awareness and like thinking through life and the kind of more holistic elements. But this course, I think, has been almost like accelerated everything and like very, very particular in this area, which yeah, has it's been so valuable and so different from anything else I've done before. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's useful, but I thought it was worth
Yeah,
sharing.
no, I think that's so helpful because every single person who has worked with me who's done counseling or therapy has basically said the same thing that you just did, where they're like, that stuff was great. However, this was just so different. And I think if you've never done like a coaching program, or, any of my programs, you almost don't know like that there is something different or like what the difference
Yeah,
could be. So I think that's like a really helpful point. Is there anything else that you would add to that of just like how this experience was different from what you got through counseling?
yeah, because I mean, yeah, I think it was just so practical, so practical. There was like, I don't know if you want me to give away too much, but
Yeah, you can share whatever. You can give away the
um,
secrets.
it's fine. Like I just found like the homework, which I'm such a nerd. Like if I sign up to something, I want to do it properly. If I'm going to invest the time, the money, I want to commit to it. But the homework was so useful. Like I still remember sitting on the bus one day, driving through London and like had a bunch of like different flag questions, like what are your red flags? What are your flags? Like how have different relationships in your life affected, the way you are? And I was just sitting like so randomly, but like in the front of the bus, just looking at London and watching people move past and writing all this stuff down around, my childhood and what I'd been through. And I just found it so, so useful to the point where at the end of it, I phoned my sister and we had a long chat about, how we grew up and all these things that we've seen. And, you start diagnosing each other, which is really fun. Um, but I love that it didn't feel too theoretical or beyond my reach. It felt like it was perfect for what I needed in this space. Obviously I was receptive because I wanted that to change. I knew something had to change. Um, but yeah, I really loved kind of the setup of being um in kind of a call with other women and we could talk about our experience, share stories. I really loved that, there was you and Anna who have different ways of communicating and different takes. So then you had like almost these two really wise voices like giving you perspective. And then you had homework that was practical. And even halfway through, I remember saying, like, guys, should I be online dating? Like, what should I be doing here? How do I practice this? And actually, you guys encouraged me to sign up to online dating, which then on my first date, I met the guy I'm now seeing. So, like, I mean, I can't say that's a guarantee, but I feel like it was just the space where you could be really open and also like sharing messages I got from people with you guys, and then you could give me feedback that didn't feel like it was just me gaslighting myself or getting stuck in my head or misinterpreting a situation. You were able to be like, actually, this is what's happening and this is not healthy. We need to think about this. So yeah, the whole thing was really well set up and designed. I enjoyed it.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. I think that gives like a really beautiful picture of a lot of the things. And there's so much more. So if you guys are curious, our next round is coming up soon. I think we're going to launch I think June is when it's going to start. You can find the link and the details in the description of this. But yeah, we are launching round two again soon. So, but I love that. So, Chelsea, now will you tell us a little bit about how things are different now for you, how you changed your approach in dating, and about your new man, who I know it's still early, we're still keeping that mindset of like, um, like things are great so far, still taking your time getting to know him, but I know it's been really wonderful so far. So I would just love to hear about all of those things.
Yeah. So, I think the first big shift for me was just being a lot more open. I think to my kind of to men that weren't my typical stereotype. Um, I'm quite like love the classic gym bro body, but maybe not the most intellectual. Or I mean that's not fair. But I guess what I realized is that like if I'm going to date differently, I need to approach it differently and be open and think about like my profile slightly differently. Um, think about the kind of men that I am allowing, into my life, and then also to be a bit more open. Um, so yeah, and I think a lot of it was like almost seeing dating as fun. This is practice, we are practicing what we are learning. We're going to put ourselves out there and just see what happens. And maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't. Um, and beyond that, like I was also just like chatting more to people in life, like just like trying to engage with more people. Generally, would like go hang out with I was signed up to touch rugby, so I was doing like a lot of like touch rugby with lots of different guys. Um, so it kind of meant that my sphere was expanding anyway. Um, and then I signed up to online dating and met so, so Tony's profile was just so different from anything I've ever seen before. So he's Spanish Italian. So like, I'm obviously come from South Africa, and I've only really dated South Africans or British people. So it was just a completely different kind of man that I had been open to seeing. And I like he's working on his English. So English is not his first language, but he speaks Italian and Spanish beautifully. So like there was quite a few things where I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Like, how are we going to communicate? How's this going to work out? But from the first date, he was just a man that like was so respectful, so respectful of like my belief system, my culture, like, I remember at the end of the first date, he gave me a hug, and there was just not this weird pressure to be or do anything else. Like I've been on dates where like guys almost come in for a kiss immediately, and you're like, whoa, whoa. Like it makes the whole situation quite weird. But he was just so respectful of me and my boundaries. Um, and he also just put so much effort in from the beginning, like set up the date, had everything, like took us to a nice hotel and like had researched the hotel and found out like all this history about it and was so excited to share it with me. Um, and just like I think that's just the way he does life, really. Just a lot of energy. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
That's so cute that he like
Been surprised.
researched the hotel. Like, was it like a restaurant you guys were going to there or something?
Yeah, so we went to a bar for a drink because he didn't want to be too much in the first date. But and then invited me out to afterwards because he sort of was going well, and then we went out for pizza at an authentic Italian restaurant because food
Of
is
course.
like his thing. Um but yeah, he had researched like it was quite a famous hotel for various reasons. Actually, no, I can't even remember. I'm so embarrassed. But and I know it was important. Um, but he was like dressed up like in a suit. Like he'd really like tried so hard. It was so lovely. But now we've been seeing each other for about so as Emily says, not too long. Like it's we met about 3 months ago, and so we've been seeing each other properly since then. And like he arrived at my door yesterday with like a bunch of flowers. Like he's just any excuse to romance, and this man is like up for it. And I've never had that before. I've always been almost feeling like I need to like beg for love or like it's weird because I'm doing far less than I've ever had to do before. And he just loves it. So
Yeah, I love that you said that about just like you're doing far less because I think we messaged a little bit about this of like, you're like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. I don't feel like I'm doing anything like that different. Like I feel almost a little bit of like imposter syndrome. And
yeah.
no, but that's kind of what it feels like when you're dating someone healthy. There's not all this struggle. It's not so effortful where you're
Mm,
having to do the most to like make the relationship work. It generally feels easy or easier because you're both like choosing into the relationship. You know, if something comes up and you both want to talk about it, you both want to work on it. It doesn't feel like you're fighting each other or fighting so hard to make things work. So, yeah, I love that. So let it be known if you've been, doing the most in dating, it doesn't have to feel like that and it does not feel like that when you're in a healthy relationship. So,
yeah.
I love that. How would you say Tony's different from guys that you had previously dated?
Gosh, by so much. One thing is I'm incredibly attracted to him, which is interesting because like a lot of previous men I'd been trying to make it work with, I was like at the end of it was like, do I even like them? I'm not really sure. With Tony, I really, really like he's a very attractive man, even objectively, just a very attractive man. Um, what other things are very different? So I think value. So I think what was interesting is from the beginning, I was just very upfront after this, doing this course, what I was looking for. I didn't feel like I had to hide what I wanted. And I was like, I'm dating for marriage. I want a family. If you don't want kids, you're not interested in marriage, you don't. Also he's religious, so he's the same religion as me. And previous guys I'd, been interested in and kind of said they were, but then you kind of realize that they're not really um on the same page with it or not really interested in it. But you kind of you in your head you justify it and you kind of like, well, maybe they'll become Christian or they'll become religious if they just see how wonderful it is. So many things I think I had almost compromised on just because I wanted the outcome instead of the person, or like I thought I wanted the person, but in hindsight now, I'm just like, what was I doing? Why did I compromise on things that are so important to me? Um, that I just don't feel like I have to compromise on now because we want the same things. Like Tony is so, you know, he was saying he's like, he asked me from the beginning, are you a traditional woman? And I was like, oh no, like, what does this mean? And we had a discussion around that because you were like, okay, this could mean a few different things, but let's keep an open mind and ask more questions. So I was like, okay, I need to investigate. But for him, it just meant that, like, do you have traditional values? Do you want a family? Do you want kids? Um, do you want a husband? Like, do you want a home? Like, what does that look? And those are all the same things I'm looking for. We just maybe use slightly different words and slightly different language. And that's where talking through it with you was really useful, was it gave me the tools to know, okay, I can give people space to explain or ask questions and get more information from them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. So many good things you said there, Chelsea. Did I cut you off? Are you going to say something else?
No,
Okay.
you fine?
'Cause, yeah, like what you're talking about is how we taught you to vet a little bit more because like I remember that conversation. I live here in South Florida where I see a whole lot of like interesting things in the dating field, like or dating field, and like
Yeah.
Miami near me is notorious for like hookup culture and just all kinds of different things. And so, yeah, it's the whole thing of sometimes people will have profiles that sound really good, and it will create like a false sense of safety. It's like, oh, we want the same thing. But if you don't actually ask them to explain in their own words, like what they mean by that, sometimes it's like there may actually be red flags behind what they're saying. Like we
Yeah.
talked about the whole, like, the Andrew Tates of the world, like the guys who are very much into that stuff might also put like traditional values on their profile.
Yeah.
And then like they're controlling and have all these like unhealthy projections about women. But then you have people who like are like Tony and they're just like, I want family, or I want a family, I want to get married, all those things. And like that's what it means to them. So just taking those general kind of statements and phrases, like you can't take them at face value. You need to vet. So yeah, one of the things we talked about for sure. And there was something else he said that was so good that I wanted to comment on, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, about how, you were like kind of afraid to really, I guess, be upfront before about what you wanted, or really have those standards as what they were. And I think so many women experience that. And I'm curious to hear, your thoughts on this, but I think, when I've done this in the past, it's probably been like a fear that what I want isn't really out there, or that I will have to settle, or that like I'm going to eliminate too many people in the dating field. And then I'm not going to have options if I do that. So like what do you think was behind it for you?
Yeah, I completely resonate with that because I remember I used to say it feels like I have to eat my broccoli, like I'm gonna have to choose a guy that's like broccoli, like doesn't quite, I don't know. I did not think things like attraction, like I just felt like, that is something you have to compromise on. And like there were a couple of things like, maybe intellect as you can compromise on that as long as they have certain other values. Um, but what I found quite extraordinary, and again, like I honestly feel quite lucky in the sense that yeah, I just I don't feel like I've had to compromise on anything with Tony. I mean, obviously there will be moments of compromise, but with like who he is already impressive without having to feel like I'm giving a lot up of what I would like. Um, and I think that, yeah, that is it's inspiring and it gives me hope because you do see those couples, who it looks like, they've it's just lucked out, but because I did feel for a long time and looking back at my dating history that there's so many men that now I just wouldn't choose for myself for so many reasons. Um, Yeah, and I don't really know the space I was in when I decided to try and choose them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think the really interesting thing is that there is often a fear of, if I really am upfront about all these things that I want, or have these standards, that there are going to be fewer options, and that like you're not going to find that person. But I often see the opposite happen, where like once you get really clear on, nope, this is my standard, this is what I'm looking for, like I won't compromise on these things, but then I'm open on these other things because I've really prioritized like these things matter over here for sure. These other things are a little, they could go either way. Oftentimes, like you start encountering people who do align with you more.
Mm,
And it doesn't happen right away for everybody. But it's really like when you really get clear, you do start to meet a lot more people who match that. And part of it is, we talked a bit about this in the program, just the subconscious mind. If
yes.
you actually believe that what you want is out there and you start looking for those specific qualities, you're going to see it. But if you subconsciously believe, men like this don't exist, I'm going to have to
Mm,
settle on important things, and just, yeah, emotionally available men aren't out there, whatever it is, your attention literally zones in or zooms in to people like that. So you are not even aware of people that are what you want. They're just irrelevant to your awareness. Your brain is literally filtering out like 95% of things at all times, and you're just operating primarily from your subconscious. So if you, on a subconscious level, don't believe these things are possible for you, you're not going to see them in your reality, not because they're not there, but because your attention's not going there.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do
Okay.
agree with
Yeah.
that. Sorry, just one more. I
No,
think
no, go
also,
for it.
especially, I think in church culture,
Mhm.
um, because it just does feel like there's more, women than men, especially in like, churches in Europe and um England.
West too.
And so
So.
there's such a mentality of like, there's just not enough men. You're never going to find anybody. You need to settle, oh, stop being so picky. Um, and so it does breed this hopelessness. And I've had lots of chats with a lot of my girlfriends where it doesn't feel like there's hope or there's anybody. But when we had that discussion, I remember going back to church and it felt like I was just meeting like so many great men. And I was like, where have you been? Like, how have I missed all of these people who I did just feel blind to before? And it is interesting how our brains work and we convince ourselves of a truth that maybe is not always the truth.
Absolutely. It's the way the subconscious mind works. So if we're not aware of it, then like we kind of do just fall into those same old patterns. So I love that. Like you immediately started kind of looking for different things and you were like, wait, maybe there are guys, and maybe they're not even like guys that you would want to date per se, that like not everything's matched, but you're like, oh, actually, there are decent guys around me. There are guys who embody certain qualities that I previously didn't think were out there. Yeah, I love that. So what do your friends think of Tony? Have many of them met him yet?
So we're starting to introduce him to people. The royal we, me, I am. Um, yeah, so far it's been really lovely. Like he's met my housemate. And he because it allows
Oh,
me
hold
to
on, you
learn.
cut out for a second. Say that again. He met your housemate and what?
He met my housemates and they just got on so well with him. And I like what is interesting for me is I find out more about him that I didn't know before. Like he's really chatty and he like has so many interesting things to talk about. And I'm like, oh. Yeah, and like this weekend is a long weekend, so he's coming away with me and a few of my friends, which will be so fun. So we're starting the introduction process. But I think what was interesting for me is he introduced me to his friends and housemate like from the first couple of dates. He was just immediately like, you know what, like if you're gonna be a part of my life, it's a very future focused. So it felt like, and his friends are really great, really nice people. It just it felt where I'd been in situations previously where everything's so hush hush, for months it's all in secret. This felt very easy and natural and organic and not forced, but like just open, Um, yeah, it's been an easy process, which has been weird. If I'm being honest, just different. Yeah, but so far so good. People really like him. He came to my church last week and was meeting people there and he was chatting away to a bunch of people. I actually lost him. I was like, where are you? So yeah, he's doing well. He's handling it all very well.
That's awesome. And for learning English, it sounds like it is not holding him back at all. That's so cute. So, okay, I just want to ask, I know we've talked about a bunch of different pieces of this, but like what comes to mind for you as some of the like main shifts that just happened for you throughout the program? Is there one or two like big ones that come up?
I think like one of the big ones, and we spoke about already, was realizing my attachment style because I think I had always assumed I was anxious, but then had behaved like an avoidant at times and wasn't really sure where that left me because you've got all these again information online about how to be if you're anxious and then how to be if you're avoidant. But then like no one really talks about the disorganized or that like not disorganized, fearful avoidant. Um,
It's the same thing.
it's
Yeah.
the same thing. But and also it's associated with quite like a weird negative stigma. so it felt like something I didn't want to like engage with because it felt like, oh no, if you're this kind of person, like there's no hope for you. Um, but then when we spoke about it and we were able to almost give it a name, it suddenly felt like I could then be more aware of my triggers. And I was like, oh, makes sense. Um, yeah, and I almost broke up with Tony after the first date. I was like, this is too scary. I remember I had like so much anxiety, and I was like, this is odd. Like he's done nothing wrong. Why would I want to run away? Um, yeah, and almost like having that awareness just gave me the moment to pause and just settle myself,
Mm.
learn to self-regulate, and just be brave.
Oh, I love that. Oh, yeah, it's crazy how much, just having that awareness of like, oh, I'm feeling all this in my body. But actually, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily with the wrong person. Like, I'm just triggered right now. Like, and I just need to pause and like work through it. And then, like, I'm going to be okay. It's going to be a little scary, but it's going to get better. And that's something that I think so many people don't have that pause in the middle. And they're just kind of reactively like, oh, I'm feeling this panic, so I'm just going to run. And there's like no even awareness that, oh, this is coming from something inside of me, not necessarily because of the other person, although sometimes, sometimes it is the other person. But yeah, that like would change the dating scene tremendously. I think if people did that a bit more, but I actually think so many people are this fearful avoidant attachment style, but felt similarly to you and also to how I felt, where I was like, oh, that's the one with like all the trauma, right? Like, oh, that can't be me. And that's not exactly like the case. It's like we have the most core wounds where we have triggers around the anxious side and around the avoidant side. And until you recognize, like, oh, when I'm pulling away like this, like that's also me being triggered, it can be a little hard to date in a more secure way. So I love that. And is there anything else that you wanted to add to just like some like a big shift that happened?
Yeah, like I just this is such a small thing, but I think it's very personal to me. Was like you almost like just saying, oh, yeah, I'm trying to remember the context exactly, but you're like, not all people think the same way as you, and like realizing that actually, if I'm feeling triggered, it doesn't mean they're triggered. It doesn't mean that they are anxious and think the world's going to come to an end. Um, they could be fine, or they could process different communication styles. Um, and it allowed me to be curious about people more, without assuming or projecting my things onto them.
Oh, I love that. That's so, so important. Just being curious about people rather than, again, projecting, assuming, because so many issues come from that. So I love that. Anything else you want to add?
I mean, there's so much, honestly. I've got so many notes. I feel like we'll be here forever. But yeah, no,
Well, all that
it
we
was
said is
so
great.
helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to a woman who is considering joining the Art of Secure Dating? Maybe she's read the form a couple times, she's kind of on the fence, she's been listening to some of the podcasts, and she's like, ah, do I do it? Do I not? What would you say to her?
Oh, do you know, I remember like when I signed up feeling really anxious about it. And like I'd listened to a lot of your podcasts, I'd watched a lot of your movies, not movies, reels on Instagram, giving away my age. And I remember feeling like really anxious about the sleep. Um, but I can say with like confidence, it was worth it. Like the whole thing was so helpful, and still to this day, it helps me with it helps me with relationships beyond the romantic, like my family. It helps me with work relationships, tricky people that I don't know how to talk to in a way that um allows for us to connect. Like it really, I feel like it's had far bigger impact than just what it says on the tin. What it's not only for dating. I think it's for so much more than that. So I'd say just do it. Try. You've got nothing to lose.
Absolutely. And what you said, like that fear about taking the leap. I think that like most people feel that. So it's kind of recognizing like the fear about taking the leap doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It's kind of like you were talking about after your first date, like all this anxiety, all this fear doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. It means like take a second, regulate, and then proceed with courage, like take a brave action. So I love that. There's so much on the other side of taking those brave actions, even when we're scared, whether that is a beautiful relationship or whether that is, getting to go through a program that like changes dating and changes your relationships for you, whatever it is, there's so much on the other side of just taking that brave action, even if it feels scary. So I love that. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for doing this. You just had so much great stuff to say. You were a wonderful podcast guest, and I really hope that this inspires any of the women listening to this. And once again, if you guys are interested in applying for the next round of Art of Secure Dating, you can find the details for that in the show notes and the link there. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Instagram as well. And I'm happy to chat with you about whether it's a good fit, about your situation, all the things. So you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm wishing you so much love and luck on your journey towards becoming more secure.